The concept of a talisman or an amulet, it's kind of like a modern day mask, a way of expressing an identity within a certain framework. I went to visit some friends in Apollo Bay, which is on the very, very south coast of what's called Australia. A seal, a massive seal, had come up onto the beach and died, or had died and been washed up onto the beach. These friends took a rib, and that was a gift to me because of my ancestry and what I know, and also stories that I've written which are about the legends of the She or Selkies, and this deep understanding of the communion between us and cousin species. And there's the deepening where you understand that we are not living on the land, but that we are actual fruit. And that fruit is of water, earth, mountains, sky, rain, snow, decades, eons. And so the seal was in the environment of our deeply ingrained heritage to County Galway. That heritage goes back, I don't know for how long, not including other tree branches that we have discovered, but the connection with the islands of our ancestors deeply affected me, particularly after I'd been there and I drank the water. Something happens when you partake of the food and the nourishment of the land of your ancestry that is so deeply built into one's bones and genome, every cell of the body, that we don't actually always recognize it because we've been so biased by different hegemonies and different ideologies and been brainwashed by all that. So once we sort of wake up, there's no stopping the process unless the terror of being cast out or of being exiled from a presumed community happens. Then there's trying to swim in a vast and uncharted ocean of individuality and break free of the traps of the slavery of the ideologies that we've been stuck within and that we've been led to believe identify us. Okay, so how does talismans fit in? I get gifted this seal rib. I mean, I left it alone. And then I came back to it one day with this sense of yes. I picked up the diamond blade and a few other bits and pieces of tools, laid them all out, sort of like I've got here, and I cut it into 3 pieces. I thank with all the depth of me, of the Māori, for what they know of lashing and punamu. And so I learned that. I sat there and I worked it out. And it was a beautiful video, and learned to utilize that technique of the binding on bone or stone or whatever. It's a strange form of meditation, contemplation, where you get out of the way of what you're doing to a degree. And you let your fingers, you let your consciousness, which of course is minimum 18.4.6 billion years of ancestral knowledge that comes through from a theoretical Big Bang or a singularity, whichever one you want to look at. And we've got to get out of the way of our own brains and how clever we think we are as a species. And once that's done and we settle down and we just go through the rhythm, which for those of us of a so-called Western culture is more appropriate to imbas, more appropriate to Awen, more appropriate to inspiration and contemplation than any form of sitting and chanting somebody else's ways. All right, back to the concept of talismans. So the bone has been cut, and instead of being so arrogant as to impose my will on this seal rib that was not only gifted from the people who gifted to me, but also the gift of millions of years. I'll go to this before I go further. This here is linen thread. It's about 100 years old. It had a label on it when I got it. So it was actually created in Ireland in the 1920s and just sat there completely unused. It was in its wrapper. And it's the colour of my ink. And something happens when you're on track. Something happens in your body. It's that bubble of excitement that says there is a reason. You just don't need to impose your idea of what that reason is. So I brought it home, and it's been sitting in my box over there with all the other sewing materials in its wrapper, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And just started the other day, a couple of days ago. It's like all the light bulbs in consciousness came on at once, and I looked at this seal bone and I went, you're telling me who you are. You're telling me talisman. But instead of jeweler's tools, I've got these big things that I can actually utilize in my car if I need to sort of like get the corrosion off the battery. But any tool whatsoever can do its magic if we just get out of the way of it. And this is really, really important, to get out of the way of a tool, because if you impose your will on a tool, you use force. And working as a martial artist for 40 years, I've realized that you've just really got to let the weapon do the work, because the weapon knows better than you. And it's similar with the saw blade. So in this instance, I've got a 00 blade, but it's quite tight. And as you can see here, there is a vise, and what I do, I've got some chamois leather, and the chamois leather gets put into the vise when it's open. I use my awl to just push it down, so that when I'm working a piece, I'm not going to damage that piece by putting it into the vise without protection. So I put it there, and I used these circular and curved tools to just let the bone do the talking. And it said, wave me. I'd curved the edges here, utilizing the saw, and then utilizing the roundness of the files to just give it exactly what was necessary, and put the hole in it as was just instructed. And there was a piece left over that again just required a little, I had the hole in it anyway, but it required just a bit of love to set that just above the piece concerned. So there's a story associated with every aspect of this particular talisman. That includes this bronze ring here that's connected. And the bronze ring that's connected is associated with the works of Tacitus. Now, Tacitus was the chronicler, and of course his work was biased because he was working for the Romans, but he recognized with the Druid women on the shores of Inishmon, on the shores of the Menai. The quote was something, I mean, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but the quote was something along the lines of, there was all these women in funereal black running up and down the beach, chanting imprecations, yelling, in other words, with their hair like snakes, and at the end of their hair was a little bronze ring. Now, the significance of the little bronze ring is lost, except in here, except in the belly. Just so that you know why the pieces are on there. Each piece has its own memory and its own being. I've got leather here from deer hide. See, the lashing, which is a mouldy term, I was taught about it. And it was called a knife binding when I learned about it, which is again many, many decades ago. Again, the same dark blue as the actual thread. So to progress further, there will be a time when I need to consider the effect of weight, so that I'm very aware that on my left, the bronze ring forms a heavier aspect to the two smaller bronze rings that are on the other side. I have created 2 loops, as you can see. I've done the fine braiding yesterday that forms the cord, and those will be worked out as I progress. So I'll just leave that there. I've threaded the needle already, and I've also cut in preparation for the whipping sections of the linen thread, and I've split them into fours, tied at each end. I've got 2 lots of that. They're going to be the whipping that goes on to the actual attachment from the talisman to the leather. So with the leather, I could work on 3 levels here. I could work with this. You can see that? That's for putting holes in leather. I could work with that. This is a brilliant idea. This is also for putting holes equidistant into leather when you're doing leather work. And these can be picked up at any leather supply shop. Or I could use this, which is an awl, or the equivalent of an awl. So I'm going to be using this because I don't want to do overkill, and all I'm going to be doing is put a bit of strength into the loop that will be worked with a whipping, sorry, when I put it on, but I want it to be stable in the meantime. So to do that, I will utilise a very light hammer. This is a jewellery hammer, to put just a couple of holes on both pieces in preparation for stitching them together before I do the whipping. And I want to do a similar thing to the other piece. I've just got to work out which one is the stronger length. Should be this one. And just using your eyes to find the distance between each of the holes. Okay, now because I don't wear glasses, I prefer to get a little pair of these from a chemist. They're magnifying glasses, but they're just really handy when I'm working with tattoo or tatouage on a person, or when I'm working on very close-up work. I'd prefer to not make a mistake. I don't want to make a mistake and screw up an art form. So I'll wear these. So these get put together in such a way as I don't have to line up the holes, I just need to know that they're there. But it's going to make it so much gentler and so much easier to create the way through each of these. And I don't need to necessarily use them all. So I've double knotted the thread, and I'm going to go backwards and forwards. I don't need to use all of those 10 holes, I just needed to find the ones that will be harmonious to sticking it together, or keeping it all together. So I'm taking my talisman so far, and this doesn't have an intention behind it, by the way. This talisman is to honour the seal and to honour the connection to the deep ocean and some of the stories that are associated with that. And whatever happens as a result of creating a talisman is always destiny. So I get the loop here. I get the loop, one of the loops at the end of the knotted thread, knotted cord, and I pass the leather through it. And I want to make sure it's quite stable, etc. So I could avoid doing this stitching completely, but it just is a little bit extra to create a sense of strength and stability in what I'm doing. Okay. Passing the needle back and forwards, I don't need to worry about it particularly being small stitches. That's one done. So with the second one, exactly the same thing. I just need to make sure I've got enough room for everything. So you pass it through the braiding of your cord. I've done my punctures. And I'm starting my stitching quite close to the braiding. As I said before, it's just to stabilise what I'm doing. I do use my fingers a lot to sense the prick of the needle. I end up with holes all through my hands, but they seem to heal up overnight. But the ability for hands and body parts to become synchronized with consciousness is quite extraordinary, really. Okay. So there we are with that, and now I need to do the whipping. So what I've got to work out is whether I want to bother starting from where the hoops are, the little loops are, or whether I want to, which is right at the knot, or whether I want to start where the leather is. So I just sit it down for a moment and have a think, have a little look, have a little think about how this is going to go. The older linen thread, this particular linen thread that's come from Ireland, is very strong compared to the more modern linen. It's very interesting how a plant person can change over generations through the loss of wildness, I suppose. Okay, so what you do to do the whipping or the knife binding is you leave plenty. You need your thread to be like so. I'll put it against the whites, as you can see. So when you're laying this out, you want to be able to cover both the braiding area and a bit of the leather or whatever. So I just start going around as evenly as I possibly can with the whipping. And this is where the glasses go on. It's just a matter of keeping the tension in place as you move along your working area. I like to keep it really neat because there's no need to compromise beauty for expediency, is there? When I go from the braiding to the leather, I'm going to start tightening it. It's pretty good. Okay, I'm very close to the end of the loop that I created at the beginning. So I'll use my awl, AWL, to just separate that all up. To make certain that I'm getting every aspect of the thread when I pass the whipping through. That's it. Now I need to use some spit to hook that together, and I'm still holding on to the whipping as I pass the thread through the loop. This light's not brilliant. Bring it in. Whoa, that works. Okay, so I'm keeping the tension on, but I'm up to the other end, which is where I had the original thread. And I can see where I need to redo this, but at this stage in time, I'm just going to pull it through and get it all sorted out from this end. And to do that, you just need to make certain you got it all very close together. Pull it all through. What's going to happen is the finished thread, the other end, will go through the whip-in. You can see I've got a piece that's really lumpy in the middle. I'll sort that out in a minute. It's enough to make sure that I've got a very stable whipping between the cord, the thread, and also the knot. You could do all kinds of things to make this easier on yourself, but I just think it's quite a really beautiful experience to be patient with yourself as well as all the equipment that you're working with. So find a place to start, and you just go back around that same area that before was a bit tricky. Just to strengthen the whipping in that middle section. Right. So by doing this, I'm creating a kind of equidistant thickness between the first lot of whipping and this second lot of whipping. I'm going backwards and forwards a couple of times because I've got enough thread to do that. But I want to get it as close to the loop as I possibly can before I complete the process. It's tight. It is not so tight as I can't do the pull through. Keeping the tension on the whipping and just pulling quite carefully through it. Once I'm close to the edge, then I'll just check out where I'm up to, and then I'll complete the process. Just pulling it that little bit extra way. So now we cut the ends off. You can do it right up next to it and even shave that even more so later. And also the leather that's sticking out. So you end up with this. See if I can get this in real close to you. See how it kind of links up there and thickens up to be the equivalent of the where it links with the leather. I'm going to leave this light low. It's much better that way. This, popping the needle like that into the spool, is what our grandmothers used to do, so we didn't lose the needles. Back on with the magnifying glasses, doing the next lot of whipping. I'm actually going to do this in one hit rather than two like before. You can make this a lot easier by using glue before you go, blah, 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 by using a different kind of cord. But because I'm just being pedantic, I just want to be able to use this gift, which is quite ancestral. Okay, so now, as I sit here and I hold this, I can feel the weight. Now I can either want to do one of two things. Either I can just leave it weighted as it is, or I can gather a whole series of these, or these little brass rings, which are very, very handy when I'm working with this, and I've got a lot of them. So what I'm looking at doing is adding a weight to this other side. And what I want to do is sort of irrelevant. I tend to look at a lot of the different things that I've got, and I've got baggies and baggies of bits and pieces that you'll tend to collect if you do make talismans. I think I should mention that one needs to be quite careful of, there is no word, well, prohibition is probably the closest. I don't like the word taboo because I understand it's a Māori word tapu, and that the word tapu has, the meaning of the word tapu is an area that is to be left alone and honoured and respected, because there may be other things going on, or there will be other things going on that have got nothing to do with this, like an area of quiet in a river where the eels spawn is an area that is tapu. So Captain Cook gets hold of the word and thinks it's got something to do with evil and spreads it throughout the world. So nowadays everybody's saying that's taboo, which is to do with that which is prohibition. Now it's whether or not that prohibition has an ethical reason behind it, or whether that prohibition is an indoctrinated relationship to somebody else's rules. And as an anarchist, you don't always follow other people's rules. So what I don't want to do is impose my will on this talisman. And in the work of Draoichta, that's prohibited. So to understand the piece, to understand where it is, how it's experiencing itself without interference. So I picked up this pretty incredible bunch of topaz. Is what they are. You see how if I put the green with that, it's actually quite repulsive, it's actually quite vulgar because it's an imposition. Whereas if I take the brown topaz, less the little diamantes, that is going to work and it's going to actually set there. And if it doesn't, and I've fucked up this entire necklace, I don't care, because over the process of several billion years, it'll just become soil anyway. So, am I willing to cut this? Absolutely. To do that, I use a few tools. I've got, some of your pliers become very important. I've got a lot of flat nose pliers. Your round nose pliers are fabulous for creating hoops for threading beads and making sure they've got a flat end, which would be these. And that flat end allows you to then cut off the offending piece. This one's got a flat end already on there. Can you see that? A bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is to utilize my tools to, first of all, disconnect the loop. I want this loop to remain so far at the moment. So I'm going to go the next one along and just open the link and take off the rest of it. Yeah, I'm going to need both loops. So I reclose that jump link and I look at what I've got to do. So what I need to do is to go to the jump link between one gem set and the next gem set, just to find the opening. There it is. Get the other flat nose pliers and just separate them out. This is the experimental part of a talisman, where you don't impose your will, but you just find what actually sits in harmony. I don't want the jewels. Now I've got to look at it and figure out what's the best thing to do here to be able to maintain the integrity of the stone in its setting, but to also remove the jewels. And so to do that, I'm going to use my vise and I'm going to use my saw, and I'm just going to saw that off so that then this will sit on the, quite a beautiful thing, but we shall see whether or not it likes it. With a blade, just like with a katana, it's just always, again, I said it before, but I'll reiterate, you let the tool do the work and you don't impose your will on the tool. These know why they're created, they know their purpose, they are adept at that purpose, they have been utilized for this purpose for as long as anybody's been utilizing blades, whether they're the blades of knives, whether they're the blades of swords, whether they're axes. So they know their shape and they know their purpose. And what we do is we relax into it so that the actual tool itself is doing the work and all we're doing is guiding it. It's a bit rough on the edges, so while it's still in the file, you hasp that back. It doesn't take much. So what I've done is remove the end, but I've maintained the actual topaz. We look at it and go, what do you need? And you need to be before the blue stone, and yes you do. So we just need one more jump link, and we need that jump link to be fairly substantial. So See what we got. So I'm using one of Michelle's jump links. I attach it to the braiding with the tools there. Going to need to make sure this is really aligned, because if it's not aligned, it's just going to fall off. So I want it completely up to date. On go the glasses. Beautiful. While I've got the tools in my hand, I'm just going to have a quick look around everywhere else and make sure everybody else is also lined up. We have a slight variation there with this particular link. And if you overreach half a millimetre, you're going to end up being completely in alignment. Okay, they're all good. So now it's a matter of whether or not the talisman is comfortable with this whole workout. Feels pretty good.